Hey guys, welcome to HipHughes History, the Election for Dummies series. My name is Mr. Hughes, and if you haven't met my little buddy over there, that's Noam Chomsky, and we're about to deliver the election of 2004 on a platter of learning. Who's this lecture for? Specifically AP government students, which means it would also probably be cool for an intro to poli-sci type of class, maybe even US history at the college level, and my favorite peeps out there in the world, internet weirdos. All right, guys, so giddy up. Let's start the learning. Ding dong. Let's go. All right, let's take a look at the candidates, right? Obviously, you have to know who the candidates are. And we have George Bush in one corner, the Republican and the incumbent. And we have John Kerry, kind of a liberal senator from Massachusetts, who has a history in the military in Vietnam and the war protest movement. And we'll talk about all that groovy stuff in a moment. But those are your candidates. And let's take a look at the electoral map first. Because I think if we take a look at the electoral map, watch this. We probably can use that as a reference point. So you can see, and especially if I make myself disappear here, that this election is it's very coastal, right? You can see that John Kerry, the blue, the Democrat, it's localized. This looks like a virus outbreak, right? The Democrats have the Northeast. The Democrats have kind of the Great Lakes states, the industrial states. This is kind of blue collar and union territory. Remember, the Northeast is heavily urban, and that's going to swing, Democratic. And then we have to go all the way across the United States of America, all that land of the red. And remember, the red demographically, right, is probably a little bit older than the rest of the country. We've learned in class that the older people generally vote Republican. It's definitely more rural, right? And that's going to be more socially conservative, higher religious attendance. And we've learned in class that higher religion kind of affiliation and rural and older people, that's Republican basics. That's the base when we talk about the base. And then we got to swing over to California, right? Surfing, man, we're out there in the West. And we're definitely more liberal. Socially liberal and probably economically liberal. We have California, heavily urban. And then we have kind of the Pacific Northwest. And they kind of do their own thing out there. And they're definitely blue states. So there we go. Let me come back into the picture. I'm going to watch it. Wow. That's our base. Electorally, we can see that George Bush is going to win 286 to, 251. John Edwards actually got one electoral vote, which is kind of a strange story, faithless electors. And popular vote-wise, I think it's like 53 to 47%. It's a 3 million vote difference. I think a total of 62 would be about 130 million people voted. It's about 62 million to 59 million. So that's the highest amount any person ever got, was that 62 million until 2008, and Obama's going to break that record. But it's a pretty even contest, and in the end, of course, George Bush is going to come out with a win. Definitely a more solid win than 2000. So let's take a look at first why George Bush is the nominee in the context of what's going on in his presidency. So he is the nominee because he's the incumbent. And remember, you want multiple choice on your AP exam. Incumbency, that's the number one factor in terms of having an advantage. Whether it's congressional incumbency, and I love the word, franking, like free mail privileges. I think that's what that means. So, well, George Bush is the incumbent. So he has the power of the presidency and the bully pulpit. He has the media, kind of being able to, in a sense, kind of project his will on the nation in terms of what he believes. And he, is definitely not going to have opposition. That's a big deal in the primary. So as John Kerry is going to kind of be slammed from the right with Lieberman and the left from Howard Dean, George Bush is just going to be swag baby. So the power of incumbency. In terms of where he is in his presidency, I would say that we've kind of seen a bell curve with George Bush. When he's elected, he's kind of in the middle there, about 50%, a very hotly contested election, 2000 decided in a sense by the Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore. There's definitely controversy with the voting and butterfly ballots and hanging chads, and that's a whole other story. Go watch a video or something. But it's definitely ugly as he comes into office in terms of the nation being split. He's not coming in with 60 or something, approval ratings, people giving him a benefit or a chance here. The nation is ideologically divided, and in fact, I believe it was, I'm going to mess up names. Why is the name Jeffords coming to mind? But I think there's a senator, I want to say Jeffords so bad, someone Google it, and I think he was from Vermont or New Hampshire, and he was a Republican, and he switched to being a Democrat when George Bush was elected, and that gave the Democrats control over the Senate, and that's a big deal, right? The majority leader is now a Democrat. The Democrats control, in a sense, the flow of legislation, and this is a big kind of, black and blue mark in George Bush's kind of early presidency. And then 9/11 occurs, and of course we've learned from other events, whether it's Pearl Harbor or the attack on the USS Maine, when the nation is attacked, the country gets behind the leader. So George Bush is going to enjoy, in the months after September 11th, 90% approval rating. And then George Bush and his team of neocons turn their attention to Iraq. And that's another video, man. I don't know when I can make that video, but that video about Iraq and the history of the Iraq War. But there's definitely controversy in terms of weapons of mass destruction and connections to Al-Qaeda. The point being here, because we're not going to fall into the pit, the quicksand of Iraq here, is that George Bush's 90% approval rating is going to diminish from 2000 to 2004, especially after giving that aircraft carrier speech and the mission accomplished sign, which is on the wall behind me. And if you do that, you best be done with the war. And of course, right after this, we have, a huge uptick in violence in Baghdad, and America's bogged down in kind of an urban Vietnam situation. And George Bush is carrying that on his shoulders going in. That's why this election is going to be so hotly contested. So let's take a look at John Kerry a little bit and get to know him, and then we'll move on. So here we go. John Kerry, liberal, I would say liberal, senator from Massachusetts. A little bit about his history. John Kerry comes from wealth, blue-blooded, they would say. He has a lot of money. He's married to somebody with a lot of money, and the ketchup lady, the Heinz lady, is ketchup. But he has a kind of a very interesting past. He signs up to go to Vietnam. So, unlike Creedence Clearwater Revival and Fortunate Son, he's the fortunate son that goes. And he faces very real fighting on riverboats and fighting the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, getting shot at. And he comes home with medals. And then he turns against the war, and he becomes a Vietnam War protester, seeing the war as unjust and claiming that the administration of Nixon is lying to the country and yada, yada, yada. He throws his medals back, and that definitely has a visual that can be very controversial. So coming from there, he goes into politics, and of course now he's the senator from Massachusetts. He did have a primary, and this is important. Primaries can be good because they can rally people around you and allow you to define yourself, but they also can be bad. Case in point, looking at the last election. Mitt Romney got destroyed in the primary. He was dancing all over the place and people attacking his character, and he walks into the election with Obama kind of all bloodied up.
Ready! Aim! Fire!
So let's take a look at the primary, right? The primary is, of course, the contest before the national election. And the direct primary, kind of one of the Wisconsin ideas from the progressive era, is kind of now the way, direct democracy, that we kind of, elect our candidates. And remember, this is a political party. Political parties aren't in the Constitution. That's unwritten. So in a sense, they're kind of not really public. They are public, but they're private because Anybody could start a political party. So how they elect candidates for a long time was done kind of behind backroom doors. So the primary is the way for the people of the party, if it's a closed primary, to elect their candidate. Remember, an open primary is when anybody can vote in that primary, and that has different consequences. If you're running in an open primary, you have to appeal to a wider demographic kind of swath of the American people, where if you're running in a closed primary, and the Republican Party has a lot more closed primaries, you're really kind of talking to the far reaches ideological of your party, the far right if you're a Republican, and for Democrats, kind of the far left. I.e. Howard Dean. So Howard Dean was actually the early favorite to win the nomination. Howard Dean kind of is the first American politician to kind of use the internet to raise money, and his money isn't coming from these huge corporate kind of lobbyists, but it's coming from individuals because the internet allows you to do that. They were called, I think, Deanites, and he raised millions and millions of dollars going into Iowa as the favorite. And remember, the Iowa caucuses is the first kind of path to the presidency, and then they go to New Hampshire, and then there's some southern state votes, and then Super Tuesday. So Howard Dean, and we're getting to another big idea here, comes in third, I think, maybe, in Iowa. And that's not even the point. The point was that when he gave his speech, he had a really hoarse voice, and it got kind of really awkwardly quiet when he yelled, and he kind of went,
Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
And that, I think, destroyed his candidacy. So if you ever write about that, it's called the Dean Scream. You can write about the power of the internet and social media. This is really the beginning of kind of the craziness, I would say, right? Mark Rubio gives the State of the Union response speech the other night, right? He talks, for 20 minutes about, ideology and politics, and you could agree or disagree, but what does everybody tweet about? Hashtag awkward. So the Dean Scream, or the Rubio water bottle. In a lot of ways, this is reminiscent of 1988, and when George Bush's father, George Bush Sr., ran against Michael Dukakis, another liberal from Massachusetts. And I think Democrats have learned this lesson, that you don't run liberals from the Northeast, because looking at that electoral map again, you don't win any southern states, right? Who are the only Democrats who have won southern states in the last 30 years, right? Bill Clinton from Arkansas, right? And Barack Obama, kind of an African-American, higher turnout in the South, and I might be pointing to Noam Chomsky's belly, and I don't know why. But nevertheless, John Kerry, Michael Dukakis, they're stuck demographically in the Northeast and the far West. And George Bush wants to paint him in that corner. So, I think John Kerry defined himself as the anti-war guy, and that's important because that's the Democratic base. You have to turn out your base, a very important strategy in an election. But he wants to hang kind of the liberal tag to John Kerry, so that defines him. So number one, he brands him as an elitist. And visuals are really important, so whether it's the visual of John Kerry, and I think there's the surfing kind of thing. They did an ad with him surfing and made him look kind of, out of the mainstream, kind of like he's not like one of us. They did that to Michael Dukakis and the tank ad, right? It works really well. George Bush is the guy you'd rather have a beer with. John Kerry is a little bit out of touch. He's a little bit weird. He's a little bit different. And then they really hit him on the flip-flop charge. They called it, that he flip-flopped. I don't remember the direct quote, but when talking about politics, you can really easily look like you're kind of like a real slickster. And when John Kerry voted for military funding for the soldiers in Iraq, sometimes you'll vote for a bill, the bill that you sponsor, that might have some amendments that the other side doesn't like. So he votes for an $87 billion funding bill that has attachments to maybe withdrawal or something like that. And then that gets shot down, and then the Republicans will bring up the bill again without those amendments, and John Kerry votes against it. So he has to say, I was for the bill before I was against it. And that doesn't sound good. It sounds like you're a slickster. So I think that if you're writing about this, the flip-flopping, the elitism charge, and lastly would be the swift boating. Isn't this awesome language that we get to use? The swift boating of John Kerry. The Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, I think that was what they were called. They were a 527 group, which has something to do with campaign financing that we're not going to go into right now. But they're kind of free to make ads and go after John Kerry pretty hardcore. And they had served with John Kerry in Vietnam. And they are making claims that John Kerry is lying about his military service. And I think that, put into some people's minds doubts about John Kerry's authenticity. And look, John Kerry, was hardcore against the war when he came back, and he gave congressional testimony where he outlined that there were kind of atrocities that were going on in Iraq, look what I'm doing there, in Vietnam by Americans to Vietnamese. And that just doesn't play well. I'm not making judgments on John Kerry or on the people who are accusing him, but in terms of running for presidency and you're seen as kind of, being, I don't want to say against your country because he's doing what he thinks is truthful, it just doesn't play well. So if we take those three factors, we've branded him as a Northeastern rich, liberal, elitist, out-of-touch guy. We've made him into a liar, a flip-flop, or somebody who doesn't know, the straight and narrow. And we have also swift-boated him and kind of painted him, as the anti-war, anti-American kind of outsider. Then George Bush can be the guy that's the decider, the firm guy. So even if you disagree with me, and this brings it back home, so even if you don't think I made the right decisions when it comes to Iraq, I know what I believe, and you know that you can trust me that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And I think it's that settles the waters for him to win. Not to get the liberals in the Northeast. They're going to be like, I ain't vote for Bush no matter what. Or the industrial states, where it's more kind of an economic idea. I think that, states like Michigan and union states and blue-collar states, they're interested in economics and maybe protecting unions or raising the minimum wage or taxing the wealthy. So that might be more an economic idea. And far out west, it's definitely socially liberal. But look at all that space that he wins. And I think that Democrats realized in 2004 that unless they find a way to change the demographics, that they're going to keep losing elections. And Republicans are going to find out that this is the last election that you can just appeal to your base and win. Because this is not going to be enough anymore. Remember, demographically, if you're older, what happens? You die. Last but not least, we want to make sure that we get kind of the major event before the election. It's always kind of called the October surprise, right? Something happens that changes the mechanics of the election. And in 2004, it was the Osama bin Laden tape. The Osama bin Laden tape was released October 29th. It's like 4 days before the election. And in it, he kind of bashes Bush. So it ends up looking kind of like a pro-Kerry ad. You see Osama bin Laden. I am Osama bin Laden, and I endorse John Kerry. That's not good. Not for John Kerry. So there's definitely a Bush bounce there. Whether that's the reason why he wins the election, I don't know. But there's people out there that are crazy conspiratorial, and they hear black helicopters when I tell you that right there. So 2004, George Bush, the decider, the commander-in-chief, the guy who's going to make the decision, is the next president again for 4 years. So we'll see you guys next time. I think we're going to start looking at other elections. Maybe 32 would be cool, or 1916. I'm getting excited talking about it. And I'm getting excited because you better subscribe. That's right, subscribe to me right now, and I will fill your life with love and happiness. Maybe not so much, but I'll definitely make videos that I hope you can watch and learn things about. And then click the description button below, and you're going to find other EDU gurus that are out there. And other people on the internet making mad cool educational videos and just learning videos that are really fun to watch. And join HipHughes on Facebook. And that's it, and I'm gone, and where attention goes, energy flows. Giddy up.